Ben Bernanke is, right? And you also know, you might know some of his compatriots in committing economic crimes. Like Angrist, Joshua Angrist, and the labor lawyer at Princeton, Card, Angrist, and there are a couple of others in that crowd. And you may know, if you're an economics student, you know that the big thing now in economic research is so-called natural experiments. Has anybody talked to you about those things in your field courses? Leeds probably will. When he comes back, take a class with him and he'll talk about it. He's in Japan. You're not going to take any more economics classes? No. The idea behind natural experiments was actually spawned by Joshua Angrist, who, when he did the original work, was a very young economist at Harvard. He was a graduate student when he first started to work on the U.S. military draft during Vietnam. And there was the assertion that the burden of the draft fell disproportionately on certain races and income groups in the United States. And it dawned on him that there was a natural way to prove this. Because during the Vietnam War, there were two different regimes that determined whether or not you had to serve in the military. In this country, for decades, when you turn 18, you have to register with the Selective Service. You get a draft card. And that tells the Pentagon that you're able-bodied and how to find you, should they decide they want to use you for something. In case they decide they want a mobile sandbag, they'll know where to find you. So prior to the fall of 1969, you turned 18 and you got a draft card. And you could defer your induction into the U.S. military for a variety of different reasons. One of those, you could get a student deferment because you were enrolled in the university. You could get a deferment because you were the sole support of the household. You could get a medical deferment. You could get a psychological deferment. Or you could do what W did. You could join the National Guard and then never bother to show up to fulfill your duties. Remember, there was a storm of controversy when he joined the Air National Guard, which he did as a consequence of his papa being able to pull the strings and get him in. And then at some point in his career as a member of the Air National Guard, he'd been off on a drinking binge and failed to show up for some of his required flying time. And that way you could avoid going to Southeast Asia. There was the assertion that the draft boards were not all equal, and that if you were from the right social strata and were reporting to the right draft board, they could make sure that even though you were flunking out of school, you preserved your student deferment. And they could hold you out of the draft long enough so that you got old enough that you didn't get picked up by the draft later on. So there was this assertion that the burden of the draft fell disproportionately on different groups of people in the population. So Angrist said what happened in the fall of 1969 was that everybody who had a draft card, everybody's name went into the pot. Everybody's birthday went into the pot. I lived at 421 Webster Street in Bethlehem, PA, and the whole group of us were sitting around the TV in the living room on the night of the lottery, the first night of the lottery. And of course we all knew our birthdays, and they drew the birthdays out of one of these big rotating tubs in these little plastic capsules, and they'd break it up and they'd announce what the birthday was. And so the first one that they drew out, that person got lottery number 1. The next birthday they drew out got lottery number 2. And then they knew, because they had the draft card records, they knew how many people had that particular birthday corresponding to number 1. And those people were drafted first, no matter what. If you were 1A, you were drafted first. If you were number 2, you were drafted next, and so on and so forth. Now, the wrinkle that worked was that if at the time time that they did the lottery drawing, you had a student deferment, you could keep that if you wanted. But on graduation day, if you had a low lottery number, your name went to the top of the list because you had escaped the draft for 2, 3, 4 years. But your name automatically went to the top of the list no matter what. The lottery was drawn in October. By November, the Pentagon knew how many soldiers it was going to need in Vietnam by the end of the year. And so they knew how deep in the lottery numbers they were going to go. So I think that first fall, I'm trying to remember, my lottery was 190 something, and they announced they were only going to 160. And I had a student deferment that year. Now, I had a choice. The Pentagon announced this year we're only going to 160. If you turn in your draft status now, you convert to 1A, and we don't call you by the end of the year, you're free forever. On the other hand, if you keep your student deferment, then the next year, if you become eligible, you lose your student deferment for one reason or another, you go to the top of the queue. So the game that could be played that first fall was that if you were pretty sure the Pentagon was telling the truth and they were only going to go up to 160, and you had, as I did, 198, you turn in your draft card and you become 1A, prime U.S. grade A number 1 meat, mobile sandbag candidate. And if they only go to 160, you're free forever. But if I had kept my student deferment and the next year they went to 250, it was guaranteed I was going to go. Okay, so Joshua Angrist understood all of those facts about it. And so he could compare the draft call-up before and after the institution of the lottery. And he could then show that beforehand, blacks and low-income households were overrepresented in the military by comparison to what went on after. And so in effect, he was doing what Hone was doing. He was constructing matched pairs of people before and after the experiment. Alan Kruger, David Card, and some other people picked up on this idea, and they saw immediately that there was plenty of opportunity, plenty of other opportunities to do this. So Kruger and Card, for example, are labor economists. And all labor economists, by definition, are interested in the effect of the minimum wage on employment. And we have a federal minimum wage, but we also have minimum wages at the state level. No state may set its minimum wage below the federal level, but any state may set their minimum wage above the federal level. So there was a short period of time, I forget exactly when, but sometime in the last 10 or 15, 10, 20 years, when New Jersey and Pennsylvania had essentially the same minimum wage. And of course, there's a river that runs between Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and only a small number of bridges across. And then, New Jersey raised the minimum wage. Pennsylvania didn't. And Card and Kruger said, what a great natural experiment. Because now we've got two side-by-side households that, or businesses rather, that see different minimum wages, and they're separated by this river. And so they looked at the impact of the change in the minimum wage in New Jersey by comparison to changes in Pennsylvania, and they were matching fast food restaurants in New Jersey against their counterparts in Pennsylvania where the wage had not changed. And one of the things that they discovered was that the increase in the minimum wage in New Jersey had a positive effect on employment amongst unskilled workers, because they could run that side-by-side experiment, that matching experiment between the different businesses on either side of the river. And again, natural experiment. So Hone's suggestion was that we do a similar thing here. There are more recent demand studies. Demand for, one of them uses fish at the Fulton Fish Market in New York, and the Marseille Fish Market in France, where they do these kinds of natural experiments because of the way things change, but they can construct matched pairs between the different groups.